"Can I eat with you, Daddy?" Beggar girl asked the millionaire. His response is surprising. Every morning, precisely at 7 o'clock, Ethan Miller left his penthouse apartment overlooking Central Park and stepped into the back seat of his black chauffeured car. The driver, Marcus, never spoke unless spoken to. The route was always the same. Fifth Avenue, past the early crowd of commuters, to the controlled chaos of Manhattan's morning pulse. At 7:45, Ethan would arrive at Le Maison Blanche, an exclusive restaurant nestled between two luxury boutiques. The maitre d' would greet him by name, the waiters would snap into silent motion, and Ethan would sit at table number 5, by the window, always alone. He wore perfectly tailored suits, custom-made from a boutique in Milan. His hair, streaked with gray, was always impeccably in place. His blue eyes, sharp as glass, never lingered on anyone. He rarely spoke, never smiled. Ethan Miller was not just a millionaire. He was a symbol of untouchability in the business world. A financial architect, a ruthless investor, a ghost in boardrooms whose name alone was enough to shift decisions. Yet, despite all the headlines, no one really knew him. Behind a veil of power and precision, Ethan carried a silence deeper than most would ever understand. He had no family, no known relationships. The tabloids speculated endlessly. Some claimed he had been divorced. Others believed he was a widower. But the truth was buried far beyond public reach, tucked away in the fold of a past he never allowed to resurface. His life was a fortress, and he was its most disciplined prisoner. At noon every weekday, like clockwork, Ethan returned to Le Maison Blanche for lunch. He ordered the same meal, grilled salmon with lemon glaze, asparagus, and a glass of sparkling water. The restaurant staff respected the ritual with religious devotion. Occasionally, a curious patron would glance his way, wondering about the man who never aged, who never changed. But no one dared approach. He carried no phone during meals. He refused meetings between noon and 1 o'clock. This hour, though indistinguishable to others, was sacred to him. It was the only fragment of the day that belonged solely to his memory, one he refused to share or acknowledge aloud. Years ago, someone had sat across from him at that same table. Someone who laughed too loudly, interrupted the waiters, and added chocolate mousse to every lunch. But that was another life, buried with the quiet violence of unresolved choices. One afternoon, while exiting the restaurant under a cloudy sky, Ethan paused at the sight of something unusual, something out of place. But the moment passed, and he stepped into his car without a word. He thought nothing of it. He never did. That night, back in his penthouse, Ethan stood before a wall of windows, gazing at the city lights. He had no photos on his shelves, no paintings on his walls, just glass, steel, and silence. His life was orchestrated to precision. Everything served a function. Emotions, he had decided long ago, served none. People described him as cold, mechanical, even. But in truth, Ethan felt everything. He had just learned how to store pain so deeply that it never touched the surface. The cost of that choice was isolation, but to him, that was safer than chaos, safer than memory. He walked into his study, passed by the locked drawer in his desk, and paused for a split second. He had not opened that drawer in over 10 years. Inside, untouched, was a photograph in a cracked silver frame. A woman with laughing eyes. He never looked at it, never allowed himself. The next morning was just like every other. Ethan showered, dressed, and exited his apartment on time. The city greeted him with noise and movement, but none of it reached him. By the time he sat at table number 5 again, the world had already faded into routine. Until it didn't. Something was about to break that rhythm. Something small, something fragile. And it would begin not with an earthquake, but with a whisper on the street outside, a whisper that would echo louder than anything Ethan had ever heard. But for now, he remained untouched, unaware, and utterly unprepared for the question that would soon shatter everything he believed to be true. It had rained lightly that morning, not enough to flood the streets, but just enough to leave a thin sheen over the sidewalks, turning the city's rhythm into something quieter, muffled. Pedestrians moved faster, umbrellas clashed, and steam rose from the subway grates in slow swirls. Ethan Miller, as always, exited Le Maison Blanche at precisely 1 o'clock. He stepped into the cool air without acknowledging the doorman or the 2 men in business suits waiting nearby, possibly hoping for a chance encounter. His eyes remained forward, his steps unbroken, until he saw her. She stood no more than 15 feet from the restaurant's entrance, soaked from the rain, her bare feet planted on the wet concrete. The oversized shirt she wore, likely taken from a donation bin or discarded pile, hung on her like a curtain. Her arms were thin, legs marked with small bruises and dirt. But it was her face that halted Ethan in his tracks. Not because of the grime, but because of her stare. Direct, unwavering, too still for a child. She couldn't have been older than 7. Ethan froze, not visibly to passers-by, but inwardly. Something sharp twisted inside him. The girl's eyes locked onto his with focus that didn't belong to someone her age. There was no pleading, no desperation, just a kind of expectant clarity, like she had been waiting. Then she spoke. "Can I eat with you, Daddy?" The words were simple, fragile, but they shattered something in Ethan so suddenly that his entire body tensed. He didn't respond. Couldn't. A woman walked by and looked at the girl with disdain, muttering something about beggars needing to be taken off the streets. Ethan remained still. His gaze held hers for what felt like an eternity, but his lips stayed shut, his jaw tight. Then, without a single word, he stepped around her and entered his car. Marcus didn't look back, didn't ask questions. The car pulled away smoothly, leaving the girl behind, but her voice followed. Inside the car, Ethan's breathing had subtly changed. His fingers twitched slightly against the leather seat. He stared out the window, but his eyes weren't focused. The world outside had blurred into gray. The phrase repeated in his head, again and again. Not just the words, but the tone, the exact pitch. There was something terrifyingly familiar about it. He canceled his afternoon meeting. No explanation. His assistant, accustomed to his strict routine, called twice. He ignored it. At home, he poured himself a glass of scotch, something he hadn't done in years, and stared at the ice melting slowly. That girl's eyes had not shown hunger. They had shown recognition. That night he didn't sleep. At 3 o'clock in the morning, he stood once again before the locked drawer in his study. His hand hovered over the key, hesitating. Then he walked away without opening it. The next day was warmer. The sky had cleared, and the streets buzzed louder than usual. Yet the moment Ethan stepped out of the restaurant at 1 o'clock, the noise faded again. His eyes scanned the sidewalk with a subtle urgency he did not acknowledge to himself. She was there, not in the same spot, but close, huddled near a lamppost, sharing a crust of bread with a shaggy, malnourished dog that looked just as weathered as she did. She didn't notice him at first. He watched her fingers break the bread in two and offer it to the animal with a gentleness that didn't belong to someone hardened by the streets. He stepped forward. The girl looked up, her eyes meeting his once more. This time, she didn't speak. He stopped a few feet from her. "What's your name?" She blinked. "Lily." Her voice was soft, almost too quiet to be heard over the city traffic. "Do you have parents?" She looked at the bread, then back at him. "No." He knelt slowly, not caring that his custom pants brushed the wet ground. "Where do you sleep?" She pointed vaguely toward the end of the block. "Sometimes there," she said. "Sometimes the shelter lets me in." Ethan hesitated. Everything in his mind screamed against involvement. He had never let himself care. But something about her presence, was too precise, too perfectly wrong. "Are you hungry now?" he asked. She nodded once. "Come with me," he said. She stood, clutching what remained of the bread. The dog followed, limping slightly. Ethan glanced at it, then at Lily. "He yours?" She nodded again. "His name's Button." Ethan said nothing as he walked back toward the restaurant. The maitre d' froze when he saw them enter. Ethan never brought guests, let alone a child in rags and a filthy stray dog. But he didn't question it. "Table 5, Ethan said firmly. They were seated. The waiter, nervous, took their order. Grilled salmon for Ethan, tomato soup and bread for Lily. She devoured the soup quietly. The dog curled under the table at her feet. Ethan didn't speak. He watched. She didn't talk much, but when she did, Her words were oddly precise. She asked if the napkins were linen. She recognized the cutlery. She used the spoon correctly. When the dessert came, chocolate mousse, she smiled for the first time. Ethan felt something cold inside and begin to shift. As they walked out, Lily looked up and asked, "Are you going to come tomorrow?" "I always come here," he replied. She nodded like she already knew that. "I'll wait then." He didn't say yes. He didn't say no. But that night, he didn't drink. He sat in his study, opened the locked drawer, and stared at the photograph inside. The woman in the photo smiled, holding a baby with wide eyes and a faint scar on the right eyebrow, just like Lily. The following morning, Ethan didn't go straight to his closet. Instead, he stood for several minutes by the window, his mind suspended somewhere between thought and feeling. Below, the city began its usual dance. Cars weaving through intersections, umbrellas opening like mechanical flowers, people rushing in every direction, but none of it held his attention. He wasn't seeing any of it. He was seeing her, Lily, her small face, smudged and determined, the quiet certainty in her voice when she said she would wait. His hand hovered over the drawer he had opened the night before. The photo was still there. His wife, the baby, the same scar. He had dreamed of them, not vividly, just flashes. His wife's laughter echoing down a hallway, a baby's cry, his own voice yelling, slamming a door, then silence. The dreams hadn't come in years. He got dressed slowly. Same tailored suit, same polished shoes. But when he passed Marcus in the lobby, the driver noticed something was different. Ethan's eyes were less guarded, his posture less stiff. He didn't speak, but the silence felt different. At Le Maison Blanche, he sat at his usual table, but this time his gaze kept drifting to the street. There was no sign of her. The maitre d' noticed the break in routine but said nothing. The salmon was placed in front of him. He didn't touch it. She never came. That night, he didn't open a single document. His office remained untouched. Instead, he paced from room to room, never turning on a light, navigating the dark with a strange familiarity. At some point, he stopped in front of the mirror in his bedroom. He looked at his own reflection, not with vanity or calculation, but with confusion, as if unsure of who was staring back. The next morning he returned, earlier than usual. She was there, curled in a doorway across the street, wrapped in a piece of cardboard. The dog was next to her, breathing heavily. She wasn't asleep. She was watching. He approached. She didn't flinch. "Did you eat anything yesterday?" he asked. She shook her head. He looked at the dog. "Him. He's okay," she said softly. "He eats when I don't." Ethan looked away for a moment, his jaw tightening. "Come." They crossed the street. This time, they didn't go into the restaurant. He took her to a nearby diner. Smaller, less conspicuous. He didn't want the spectacle again. Lily didn't seem to care. She sat across from him in the booth, her small hands folded tightly in her lap. "You shouldn't be out here alone," he said, more to himself than to her. She shrugged. "There's a lot of kids alone." "Where's your shelter?" "Full," she replied. "They don't always let me in, only if I get there early. I didn't yesterday." He wanted to ask more, but his throat closed around the words. The waitress came, took their order, pancakes for her, coffee for him. When the food arrived, she ate quickly but with care, never spilling, never rushing. Her table manners again struck him. Taught, not learned on the street. "I had a mom once," she said suddenly. "I don't remember her. Just a voice. She used to hum." Ethan looked up from his coffee. What did she hum? I don't know, but it was soft, like a whisper. He felt something clench in his chest. He remembered his wife humming, always in the kitchen, usually when she was trying not to cry. He hadn't thought about that in over a decade. "Do you know your last name?" he asked. She hesitated. "Sanders. That's what they call me at the shelter." His stomach dropped. He kept his face neutral, but inside, everything froze. Sanders, his wife's maiden name. It wasn't common, and it wasn't coincidence. He paid the bill. As they walked back outside, he saw a newspaper boy selling copies on the corner. One headline caught his eye: Millionaire shares lunch with street girl. Who is she? There was a grainy photo of him and Lily from 2 days earlier, exiting La Maison Blanche. She was holding his hand. He didn't even remember that moment. He bought a copy, folded it under his arm, and glanced down at her. She didn't seem to notice. "Do you go to school?" he asked. "No. Do you want to?" She shrugged again. "If Button can come." He couldn't help it. He almost smiled. "Almost. I'll see what I can do." That evening, for the first time in nearly 15 years, Ethan called someone from his past, a name he hadn't said aloud in over a decade. Charles Wyndham, an old lawyer and family friend. "I need a private investigator," Ethan said. "The best. No leaks. Total discretion." There was silence on the other end. Then Charles asked, "Ethan, is everything all right?" "No, not yet." He hung up without saying more. That night, he placed a newspaper on his desk, opened his laptop, and began researching every orphan registry he could access. He didn't know what he was looking for. Maybe a date, a hospital, anything to tie Lily to the name she'd given. He spent hours cross-referencing shelters with known intake records. Most of it led nowhere until he saw one listing from 5 years earlier. Unidentified female child, approximate age 2, found near Queens. No documents. Placed in temporary foster care. Name assigned, Lily Sanders. He leaned back in his chair, stunned. The next morning, he returned to the same diner. She was already there, waiting in the booth, like it had become theirs. "You came back," she said simply. "Of course." She smiled, tired but warm. "I knew you would." The snow came earlier than expected that week. By noon, small flurries began to descend upon the city, quieting the usual December din with a blanket of hush. Ethan sat across from Lily in the corner booth of the same modest diner, their plates half cleared. Button rested underneath, his breathing slow and shallow. Lily was speaking in a calm, measured tone, recounting how she once tried to sleep behind a florist shop, only to be chased away by a man with a hose. Ethan didn't interrupt her. He rarely did. Her words filled the silences he had lived with for years. But today, his attention was divided. His phone, placed face down on the table, had vibrated 3 times during breakfast. He hadn't touched it, but he knew the call was from Charles Wyndham. The investigator must have found something. When Lily finished her story, she poked at her remaining hash browns and said, "It's warmer in here than the shelter." Ethan looked at her, the contrast between her frail form and the confidence in her voice as sharp as ever. "You don't have to sleep at the shelter anymore." She didn't answer. She didn't smile either. "I'm not saying come live with me," he clarified, watching her closely. "But there are safer places. Clean beds. Heat. Meals." "What about Button?" she asked, without lifting her gaze from the plate. "I'll make sure he's with you, wherever you go." Now she looked up. "People don't usually keep promises like that." "I do." She studied him, then slowly nodded. "Okay." That afternoon, Ethan made the call. Not to Charles. He would deal with that later, but to a woman named Vivian who ran a discreet private housing network for minors in vulnerable situations. He'd used her once before, years ago, during a legal dispute involving a child whose father had been one of Ethan's former business partners. Vivian didn't ask questions. She worked quietly, compassionately, and without bureaucratic delays. By 5 o'clock, Ethan walked Lily and Button into a clean, 3-room unit above a church-run community center. The air was warm, the sheets fresh. A volunteer handed Lily a set of folded clothes, and Button was given a blanket of his own in the corner. The child didn't say much. She moved cautiously through the space, touching the lamp, testing the mattress, glancing at the bathroom as if it might disappear. "I can stay here?" she asked, almost like she didn't believe it. "Yes," Ethan replied, "as long as you need." There was a long pause before she whispered, "Thank you." He left shortly after, but not without promising he'd return the next morning. As the door shut behind him, he stood in the hallway longer than necessary. He heard her voice through the thin walls. She was humming, a low, soft tune, unfamiliar but unmistakably gentle. Outside, the snow was falling harder. He pulled out his phone, and returned the earlier call. Charles didn't waste time. The investigator found something, he said. You were right to be suspicious. There's a paper trail, though it's fragmented. The girl was found near a shelter in Queens around 5 years ago. No ID, but there are two details that matter. Ethan stopped walking. First, a hospital record. A woman named Marla Sanders, same last name as the girl, checked into the emergency ward 6.5 years ago, no insurance, under extreme emotional distress. She gave birth to a girl but left within 48 hours without signing discharge papers. Ethan didn't speak. Second, one of the nurses from that shift filed a complaint at the time, said the woman was disoriented. Didn't list a father on the birth certificate, but kept repeating one phrase over and over. Ethan's grip on the phone tightened. What phrase? He'll never know. He'll never want her. He stopped walking, breathing shallow. Ethan, Charles continued, softer now. It might not be definitive, but between the name, the date, and the location, it lines up. Ethan ended the call without saying goodbye. The night passed slowly. He couldn't sleep. The hum of the city beyond his window felt louder than ever, and the silence inside him was unbearable. He poured himself a drink, didn't touch it, poured it down the sink. Then he sat down at the desk and pulled out a photograph he'd kept hidden for years. His wife, Marla. She had looked radiant that day, smiling, hair windblown, eyes full of fire. It was the last good picture they'd taken before everything fell apart, before the arguments, before the silences turned into a war neither of them had the strength to win. He hadn't known she was pregnant. Not then. The thought punched through his chest like ice. If she had been scared enough to disappear, what had he done to make her believe he would reject their child? The guilt came in waves. The next morning, Ethan returned to the community center before dawn. The halls were still dark. He waited outside Lily's room until one of the volunteers arrived and unlocked the main door. Lily was already awake. She was brushing Button's fur with her fingers. She looked at Ethan, smiled faintly, and asked, "Did you eat breakfast?" He sat down on the edge of the small couch. "Not yet. Want to share mine?" He nodded. They split a piece of toast and sat quietly. She didn't press him with questions. She never did. "I might be able to find out more about where you came from," he said finally, "if that's something you'd want." Lily's eyes flickered. "I don't remember much. Just flashes. But sometimes I wonder." "Would it scare you?" he asked. "No," she said. "It already happened. It just didn't finish yet." Ethan couldn't help the way his throat tightened. Before he left, Lily handed him something, a folded napkin with a drawing on it, a stick figure man holding the hand of a smaller stick figure girl. Between them, a dog. "I'm not good at drawing," she said. He didn't say anything. He folded the napkin carefully and placed it in his coat pocket like it was made of gold. He didn't go to the office that day. Instead, he went home, contacted the investigator directly, and gave a new instruction: run a DNA test. Quietly, use my sample. And the girls, I'll get what you need. When the investigator asked why, Ethan's voice didn't waver. "I need the truth," he said. "I need to know if she's mine." Ethan returned to the community center with two clear intentions. One, to collect a sample from Lily for the DNA test. And two, to spend more time with her without the interference of formalities or staff. Button greeted him at the door with a slow wag of his tail, and Lily was already dressed, sitting cross-legged on the carpet and drawing with a set of donated colored pencils. "Good morning," Ethan said, stepping inside and closing the door gently behind him. She looked up. "You came back again. I told you I would." She smiled, then turned her drawing toward him. It was more elaborate than the first. Still simple in form, but this time the stick figures had different clothes, and the sun had a wide grin in the corner of the page. Ethan took it, folded it with care, and tucked it into the inside pocket of his coat alongside the napkin from before. "I brought something," he said. "It's just a little swab. It doesn't hurt. I need to collect it for something important. Is that okay?" Lily didn't hesitate. She nodded and sat still as he gently rubbed the inside of her cheek with the cotton swab. "Do I get to know what it's for?" she asked afterward, not accusingly, just curious. Not yet, he said. But you will. She seemed satisfied with that. They spent the next hour at a small library nearby. Ethan hadn't stepped into a public library in decades, but Lily moved through the shelves like she belonged there. She chose a book about animals, another about space. They sat in a quiet corner, Button curled at their feet, and she read softly to him. Her pace was slow, her pronunciation sharp. Someone had taught her to read, and taught her well. Who showed you how to read like that? He asked. She turned a page. A lady at one of the shelters. Miss Joy. She let me borrow books when nobody else did. I used to read to Button so he wouldn't be scared at night. Ethan stared at her. 7 years old, possibly younger, surviving on scraps, using books as armor against the dark. The resilience carved into her voice didn't match her size. He took her to lunch afterward, not at the diner. Somewhere different. A quiet cafe in Soho where nobody recognized him and nobody cared. Lily ordered soup again. Ethan noticed she always asked for soup when she didn't know what else was on the menu. While they ate, she asked him questions this time. What do you do? I run companies, he answered. What kind? He thought for a moment. The kind that buy other companies. She squinted. So you buy people's jobs? Sometimes, he admitted. Do you ever give jobs back? He paused. Not always. She nodded slowly. Sounds lonely. He had no answer to that. That night, back in his apartment, Ethan placed a swab into the sterile envelope and sealed it with deliberate care. The investigator would collect it in the morning. He didn't rush the process. Something inside him feared the result as much as he needed it. Days passed. He continued to visit Lily, always bringing something new. A book, a pastry, warm gloves. She never asked for anything, but she accepted what he offered with silent gratitude. Their conversations grew longer, more personal. She told him about the time she had a fever in the middle of winter and lay under a bridge with only Button to keep her warm. She talked about a boy named Theo who used to share cans of beans with her before he got picked up by child services. Ethan listened, never interrupting, never promising false comfort. Then, one afternoon, something changed. They were sitting in the park, a small green patch fenced between apartment buildings. Button was dozing beside them while pigeons flapped lazily nearby. Lily suddenly pointed to a scar near Ethan's right thumb. What happened there? He looked down, surprised. I don't remember. Maybe a glass, a long time ago. She tilted her head. I have one too. She brushed her bangs aside and pointed to her right eyebrow. I got it falling off a bus stop bench. He leaned forward slightly, examining it more closely. He had noticed it before, but now it drew him in with eerie familiarity. The location, the angle, it was identical to a scar he'd seen in a photo once, on a much younger face. A photo of a baby girl he'd never met, or thought he hadn't. The image hit him hard, unspoken but clear. That evening, after dropping Lily off, he went straight to his study and unlocked the drawer again. He pulled out the same old photograph, his wife holding the baby. The scar, it had been there even then. A memory came unbidden. Marla, exhausted on the couch, eyes red, whispering, "She has your eyes." He had laughed it off at the time, thinking she was imagining a future that wouldn't happen. The pain hit him in waves. Not just regret, but the unbearable truth that his absence had left a space someone else should never have had to fill. That in turning away from his grief, he had turned away from everything. His phone buzzed. Charles. Ethan answered quickly. Did you get the results? There was a pause. Yes. Ethan said nothing. They match. 99.9% certainty. Ethan, she's yours. The room fell completely silent. Charles spoke again. What do you want to do? Ethan didn't answer right away. He walked over to the window, staring at the same skyline he had stared at for decades. It looked different now. I want her safe. Legally. Permanently. I'll take full guardianship. I can start the process immediately, Charles said. It might take some time. She's still technically a ward of the city. Then work faster, Ethan said and ended the call. That night he didn't sleep. He walked the apartment, not restless, but focused. He made lists, arrangements. He called a pediatrician at midnight. He scheduled a meeting with a child therapist. And for the first time in years, he opened a locked cabinet and pulled out a dusty book, Charlotte's Web. It had belonged to Marla. The next day, when he met Lily again, he didn't tell her about the DNA. Not yet, but he did ask her something new. If you could live anywhere, what kind of place would you want? She considered it for a long time. Somewhere with a window. He smiled just a little. I think I can do that. It was a gray morning when the investigator, through Charles, finally delivered a sealed envelope. Ethan received it in his study, standing by the window with the city barely stirring below. He had avoided opening it until that moment, knowing whatever was inside would change everything. He slid the envelope open, gently extracted the document, and read, Lily Sanders is legally registered under the name Lily Marla Sanders. Her birth certificate lists parents as Marla Lewis and Jonathan Miller. Jonathan Miller, his own name. Ethan's fingertips trembled. The paper was sterile, bureaucratic, cold, yet it beat with the certainty of truth. His heart pounded, reminded him of things he'd tried to bury. His own name untouched for years, spoken only in memory. He sat down, the chair cold beneath him. Lily, his daughter. He reread the certificate until the room seemed to tilt. Legal paper never felt so alive. A single signature at the bottom. An official who had never met any of them. The formal acknowledgement made it all painfully real. Later that morning, Ethan arrived at the community center with a quiet urgency that unsettled even the volunteers. Lily was waiting in her usual place by the window, Button asleep at her feet. She looked up and said, "You look funny." Ethan sat beside her and pulled out the certificate, placing it gently on the table. It lay between them like a delicate bridge built from words. "I know your name is Lily Marla Sanders," he said softly. Her head tilted. "That's what Miss Joy said, too." Ethan swallowed. "Lily, that's your full name. And, well, I'm Jonathan Miller." Her eyes widened, not with fear, but recognition. Recognition and something else. Relief, perhaps? Confusion? "You're my daddy?" Her voice was small. Ethan took her hand. "Yes, I've been looking for you." She didn't let go. They didn't speak again until he walked her home later that afternoon. Button trotted beside them as the snow began to fall again. Slower this time, flakes drifting between them like silent witnesses. Lily looked up and whispered, "Do you remember my mommy?" Ethan's throat tightened. Her mother's name, Marla. When was the last time he'd felt the weight of it? He glanced at Lily, his daughter, with tear-filled eyes. "I do," he said. "You were named after her." Lily nodded. "I always wondered who she was." Ethan closed his eyes, fighting the ache. He had memories scattered, fragmented. He remembered holding a crying woman in a hospital, hearing a nurse's distant voice advising rest. He remembered walking away. He remembered silence. He glanced at her again. "I'm sorry," he whispered. She leaned her head against his shoulder. "It's okay." That night, at his apartment, Ethan couldn't sleep. He pulled out old letters, unopened mail, legal notices, everything he had archived. He found one letter from a social worker, dated years back, addressed to Mr. Miller, bidding him try to locate his wife and daughter. It remained unopened in his desk. The shame hit him so hard he dropped to his knees. The next morning, he arrived early at the community center. Lily and Button were already there. He found her coloring at the table. "Daddy," she called when she saw him. He sat down. "Yes." She looked at him with guarded curiosity. "Would you like to come to my house today?" She looked at the floor, then back at him. "What's your house?" He smiled softly. "A safe place, with windows. You said you wanted that." After a long silence, she nodded. "Okay." That afternoon, at Ethan's penthouse, Lily's feet swung from the couch as she gazed out the window at Central Park, dusted with powdery snow. Ethan watched her, a mix of awe and guilt swirling inside him. He had never envisioned fatherhood. It felt too fragile, too raw. Yet here she was, in his living room, coloring on his expensive coffee table, sharing a sandwich he had made just for her. She looked at him suddenly. Will you tell me about my mommy? His breath caught. Yes, I will. But maybe you want to hear her voice instead of mine first. She tilted her head. Can I? Ethan nodded, went to his desk, and opened a drawer where he kept a small recording device and one last voicemail from Marla. It was low quality, but her voice was unmistakable. Soft, tender, full of longing. He pressed play. Lily leaned forward, eyes shining as her mother's voice filled the room. When the message ended, Lily looked up. She says she loves me. Ethan felt tears slip down his cheeks. She does. Lily closed her eyes, whispering, I know. That night, Ethan held Lily close as they watched the city lights flicker. He thought of the life that had been stolen, the years lost, but also the future that was suddenly possible. In the hush of his apartment, a name had shaken a man's world and rebuilt it again. The penthouse was unusually quiet the following morning, not because it lacked sound, but because it held something unfamiliar, presence. Ethan moved through the rooms with Lily close behind, Button trailing at her heels. She asked questions about everything. The framed photographs he never dusted, the tall shelves filled with unread books, the sculpture by the elevator he barely remembered buying. Each answer came slowly, cautiously, as if he were learning the space for the first time through her eyes. After breakfast, toast and eggs, which Lily insisted on helping prepare. Ethan placed a call to Charles. I want everything, he said, standing by the window while Lily brushed Button on the carpet. Not just the hospital records. I want to know where she went, who she saw, who helped her. I want every gap filled. I'll send someone in person to the hospital archives, Charles replied. Do you want contact with any of the staff? Ethan paused. Only those who were there that night. By midday, the investigator was en route to a public hospital in Queens, one that had changed names twice since Lily's birth. Records would be hard access, but Charles assured Ethan that a discreet legal route had been prepared. Meanwhile, Ethan took Lily back to the community center, not to stay, but to gather the few things she had left there. She was quiet on the way over, gripping his hand firmly. When they arrived, a few volunteers greeted them with warm smiles. Lily ran to retrieve a box of worn books, a plastic bag of clothes, and her few stuffed animals, most missing eyes or limbs. As they walked out, a middle-aged woman in a nurse's uniform stepped forward, eyes narrowing at Ethan. Your father? Ethan turned slowly. Yes. She studied him for a long moment before nodding. You took too long. He didn't respond. There was nothing to say that would change the truth. Back at the penthouse, Lily explored more freely. She chose a bedroom across from his own, painted in pale blue with large windows that stretched nearly to the ceiling. She stood before them for several minutes. This is good, she whispered. Ethan leaned in the doorway. Would you like to decorate it? Choose new things. She turned. Can I keep my old blanket too? Of course. The investigator's report arrived 2 days later in a sealed black folder. Ethan waited until Lily had gone to sleep before opening it. Inside were hospital notes, shift logs, intake reports, and finally, a handwritten statement from a nurse named Rosa Alvarez. It was dated 7 years prior. Patient arrived without identification, approximately mid-30s, disoriented, displayed signs of postpartum trauma, repeated the name Jonathan several times, refused to list father, said he won't want her, left hospital within 48 hours, baby left in care of city services, patient disappeared. Ethan stared at the sentence until the words blurred. His wife had been alone, terrified, and convinced he would have rejected their child. But why? What had happened between them that pushed her into isolation? He turned the page. A second report, less formal, a social worker's note, scrawled in pen. Patient may have suffered emotional abuse. History unknown. Mentioned separation. Spoke of being watched. Possibly paranoid, possibly real. Said she was being followed. Ethan's stomach dropped. There was one more page. A photograph. Surveillance footage from a pharmacy near the hospital. Marla, clutching a baby wrapped in a blue blanket, standing at a payphone. Her face was gaunt. Her eyes, haunted. She looked behind her, twice, As if expecting someone, Ethan stood, the folder slipping from his hands. He had assumed she'd left him, that she'd chosen to disappear. But the evidence hinted at something else. Fear, isolation, maybe even coercion. What if she hadn't left because she wanted to, but because she had to? The next morning, he took Lily to Central Park. The snow had melted slightly, and patches of wet grass peeked through. She ran ahead with Button, laughing as a dog chased squirrels. Ethan watched, the investigator's findings still churning in his mind. When Lily returned, cheeks flushed, she dropped beside him on the bench and said, "Can I ask something?" "Anything. Did my mommy love me?" He looked at her carefully. "Yes, more than anything. She did what she could to keep you safe. Why didn't you stay?" The question sliced through him. "I don't know yet," he admitted, "but I'm trying to find out." She rested her head on his shoulder. "Okay." Later that day, Charles called. "We found someone who remembers her," he said. "A man named David Renshaw. He used to work at the shelter where she dropped Lily off before she disappeared completely. He's willing to talk." Ethan met David at a coffee shop downtown. The man was in his 60s, with deep lines around his eyes and a calm demeanor. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Marla came in once," he said, stirring his tea. "Didn't give a name, just asked if she could leave the baby for a night. Said she'd come back." "She never did," Ethan replied. David nodded. "She was scared. Said someone was after her. I thought maybe she was just sick. But then I saw a man come by the shelter 2 nights later, asking about her. Said he was her brother. I didn't believe him." Ethan leaned forward. "Did he say a name?" "No, but he wasn't there to help her, that I could tell." "Do you remember his face?" "I do." Ethan pulled out a pen and scribbled a description request. "Would you speak to my investigator?" David nodded. "I hope you find the truth, Mr. Miller. That woman, she was running from something, and she was protecting your daughter the best way she could." That night, back home, Ethan sat beside Lily as she colored. He said nothing for a while. Then she looked up. "Did you find out anything?" "A little," he said. "Your mommy was brave. She made hard choices to keep you safe." Lily nodded. "I think she would have liked Button. I think she would have loved you both." 3 days passed before Ethan received another call from Charles. This time, there was a shift in his voice, caution, even a trace of unease. "We uncovered something unexpected," Charles said. "There's a storage facility in New Jersey registered under an alias your wife used during her disappearance. The rental records show recurring payments made in cash over the span of 6 years. It was abandoned 2 months ago. My team retrieved the contents this morning." Ethan sat forward in his chair. "What did you find?" "A box. Locked. No visible labels. We had to force it open. And it's not just paperwork. It's personal. Notes, photographs, and something else. You need to see this yourself." Ethan didn't hesitate. He left Lily with a trusted staff member, a quiet, nurturing woman from the community center who had begun helping part-time at the penthouse, and took the first car to Charles's office. Inside the conference room, the box sat in the center of a long table. It was smaller than he expected. Worn leather corners. No markings. Charles handed him a pair of gloves. "We haven't tampered with anything beyond the initial inventory." Ethan opened the lid. Inside were folders, envelopes, and at the bottom, a velvet pouch. He reached for the topmost folder. Inside, hospital records from several locations across the state, all under the name Marla Sanders. Most were psychiatric evaluations, some dated before Lily's birth, others after. They outlined symptoms: paranoia, insomnia, depression. One evaluation mentioned a referral to a counselor, a woman named Dr. Leanne Foster. But then he opened a different envelope and froze. Photos, not of Marla, of himself. Multiple angles, some old, some more recent, all taken from a distance. Some near his office, others outside his building. One image showed him exiting a car, looking straight ahead, unaware. Another was from the park. Lily sitting on a bench beside Button. It had been taken recently, within the last 2 weeks. Ethan's skin went cold. "What the hell is this?" he muttered. Charles leaned forward. "We believe Marla was being followed, and not just during her final months. These photos suggest someone was monitoring you as well, perhaps long before either of you realized it." Ethan sifted deeper through the box. One envelope was marked with shaky hand, "In case something happens." He opened it. Inside was a letter, Marla's handwriting, barely legible in places, but undeniably hers. "John, if you're reading this, I couldn't stay hidden any longer. I tried to keep her away from all of it, but it was never just about me. I was followed after the clinic. They wanted something. I never figured out what. Maybe it was leverage. Maybe it was you. I just knew I couldn't trust anyone anymore. Not the system. Not the people who said they'd protect us. I had to disappear. And I had to keep her safe. I knew you'd never understand why I left. But I prayed you'd find her. One day. Her name is Lily. She's ours. I hope you can forgive me. I hope she never has to know what I did to protect her. I loved you, even when I was afraid. Marla." Ethan let the letter fall to the table. Charles sat silently for a moment, then said, "There's more." The velvet pouch. Ethan opened it. Inside, a small flash drive and a child bracelet. The bracelet was plastic with faded alphabet beads. LLY. He plugged the drive into Charles's laptop. Dozens of audio recordings appeared. He clicked one at random. Marla's voice, quiet and ragged, filled the room. Day 63. Still no sign of him. "I saw a black sedan again today. Same license plate as last week. I know they're watching. I think they know where she is." Another recording. Day 92. "I took her to the shelter on 14th. They seem kind, but I can't stay. Not if I want to keep her hidden. I don't know what else to do." Ethan's face was pale. She was documenting everything. Charles nodded. This is more than just personal tragedy. There may have been deliberate intimidation, surveillance, possibly blackmail. Why? We don't know yet. But someone wanted Marla to disappear. And they were watching you, too. Ethan looked again at the photograph of himself in the park. That one, the angle, was taken within the last week. Whoever had been behind all of it wasn't finished. He took the drive, the bracelet, and the letter. That night, back at the penthouse, he sat in Lily's room as she slept. Buttons snored softly on the rug. The bracelet rested in his hand. When Lily stirred, eyes blinking open, she saw him there. "What's that?" she asked. "Something your mommy left for you." She sat up. He handed it to her gently. She held the bracelet for a long time, running her thumb over the beads. "Did she wear this?" "She made it for you." Lily smiled, then looked at him seriously. "Are we safe now?" Ethan hesitated. "I'm going to make sure of it." He stepped out of her room and made one more call to someone not in his usual circle. A private security firm with no name on the door and no website. He asked for a man named Reed. That same night, Reed met him in the lobby of a closed office building, where cameras were turned off and windows were sealed. He was in his 40s, quiet, and didn't bother with introductions. "Who's watching you?" Reed asked. "I don't know, but they were watching my wife, and now they're watching my daughter." Reed looked at the photograph, then at Ethan. "Then we find out who they are, and we make sure they never come close again." Ethan nodded. For the first time in years, he wasn't playing defense. He was going to war for what mattered. The following week unfolded under a tense, measured rhythm. Ethan kept Lily close. Bringing her to and from school, he had quietly arranged a private tutor for now, and never letting her out of sight for more than a few hours. The penthouse no longer felt like a sanctuary, but a fortress, and he didn't sleep much. Neither did Reed. Since taking the case, Reed had installed silent surveillance throughout the building, scanning each floor for tampering, checking the garage for unauthorized access, and cycling through months of city security footage. He worked mostly at night. His presence felt only in the quiet clicks of encrypted devices and the occasional short, precise update to Ethan. On the fourth day of monitoring, Reed walked into Ethan's study with a single printed image. "I found him." Ethan looked up from the dossier he'd been reviewing. The man in the photo wore a maintenance uniform. carried no identification, and was captured by 2 different cameras over a span of 3 weeks. Always in the background, always within proximity of Ethan or Lily. He never engaged, never drew attention, but he was there. I traced his face across 6 different city blocks, Reed explained. He switches disguises, but the eyes don't lie. No digital footprint. Either he's ex-military or someone trained to stay invisible. Ethan studied the image. Is he still watching? He hasn't appeared in the last 2 days. That either means he got what he came for, or he's planning something worse. Ethan turned to face the skyline. We need to find out who sent him. Reed nodded. I already started digging. But whoever's behind this, they're good. Very good. Government or private. I'll let you know when I have a name. After Reed left, Ethan stood in the study for a long time. He wasn't just fighting for custody now. He was fighting for truth, for security, for the past to stop reaching its claws into the life he was trying to rebuild. But nothing about this war was straightforward. Everything he learned made the shadows deeper. Later that evening, Lily approached him with a quiet question. Do I have any family? Besides you? Ethan hesitated. You had a grandmother once, on your mother's side, but she passed before you were born. What about yours? He sat down, gesturing for her to come closer. My father died when I was young. My mother, we lost contact. Why? He sighed. I made choices she didn't agree with. We stopped speaking after I married your mom. Do you miss her? Sometimes, but I don't even know if she's still alive. Lily was silent for a moment. If she is, would you want to meet me? Ethan looked at her. If she has a heart, yes. She nodded, then went back to her coloring. The next day, Ethan instructed Charles to begin a private inquiry into his estranged mother. He hadn't spoken her name aloud in nearly 20 years. Elaine Miller. She had lived in Vermont the last time they spoke, adamant in her disapproval of his fast rise in the financial world, his marriage to Marla, and everything he'd become since leaving the family's modest roots. He expected resistance, maybe an obituary. But 2 days later, Charles called with unexpected news. She's alive. And not just alive. She's running a small community farm in Vermont. Keeps to herself. She refused to speak to me over the phone, but told me to send a letter. She recognized your name. Ethan rubbed his temple. Did you tell her about Lily? No. I thought that was your story to tell. Ethan took a long breath. Send a letter. From me. He wrote it that night, seated at the same desk where he had once planned billion-dollar acquisitions. But this letter had none of the cold precision that filled his contracts. It was short, honest, a confession wrapped in a plea for connection. He told her about Marla, about Lily, about how late he was to everything, and how he was trying to fix what was left. He mailed it himself. 3 days passed, then 4, then a week. He had nearly convinced himself it would be ignored when the mailroom handed him an envelope with no return address. Inside was a single sheet of stationery, written in slanted cursive. Jonathan, I said terrible things when you left. I held on to pride too long, and for that, I've lived in silence. But I am still your mother, and if the girl you wrote of is truly your daughter, then she is my granddaughter. You are welcome to visit, both of you. The land is quiet, and I have room. Come when you're ready. Elaine. Ethan stared at the letter for several minutes. Then, without hesitation, he walked into Lily's room. Would you like to take a trip with me? He asked. She looked up from her bed. Where? To meet someone important. Someone who might want to know you. She blinked, considering the offer. Will Button come? Of course. 2 days later, they drove north. The Vermont air was crisp and clean. Snow covered the trees in thick white layers, and the roads narrowed as they approached the farmland. Lily pressed her face to the window, eyes wide at the horses grazing near the fences. When they pulled up to a weathered farmhouse, a woman stepped onto the porch. Elaine was older, thinner, her hair silver and pulled back, but her eyes, the sharp, intelligent gray eyes Ethan remembered, still held their edge. They studied him, then drifted to Lily, who stepped cautiously from the car. Is that her? Elaine asked. Ethan nodded. This is Lily. Elaine knelt slowly. "Hello, Lily. I'm your grandmother." Lily didn't answer right away, but then she took a step forward and said, "Do you have hot chocolate?" Elaine smiled. "Yes, I do." Inside, the house smelled of cinnamon and wood smoke. Lily explored with cautious curiosity. Ethan and Elaine sat in the kitchen, silent for a long moment. "She looks like her mother," Elaine said finally. "She has her kindness," Ethan added. Elaine glanced at him. "And your stubbornness, I imagine." "I hope not too much." They spoke through the evening. About Marla, about the years lost, about the surveillance, the box, and the lingering questions that no longer felt like coincidences. Elaine listened without judgment. When Ethan finished, she looked at him and said, "Whatever happened back then, you're still standing. And you're doing right by her now. That's what matters." Lily spent the night curled beside Button near the fire, in the quiet of the farmhouse. For the first time in weeks, Ethan allowed himself to exhale, but the peace would be short-lived. Because when they returned to New York 2 days later, Reed was waiting in the foyer. He held up a file with no label, just a photograph clipped to the front. "I have a name," he said, "and it's someone you know." Ethan held the file Reed handed him without opening it. Something in Reed's expression made his pulse quicken. It wasn't alarm, it was certainty. And that unsettled Ethan more than fear. "Who is it?" he asked. Reed didn't answer immediately. Instead, he walked to the center table in the living room, where Lily's crayon drawing still sat untouched. He waited until Ethan joined him. "You remember Thomas Reddick?" Reed finally said. Ethan's jaw stiffened. "Of course I do. He was my head of compliance at the firm for almost 10 years. Left to start a security consultancy." Reed nodded. "And that consultancy, while never publicly dissolved, shifted into private contracting. I pulled old employee records, cross-referenced surveillance operations, and matched faces through deep biometric scanning. Your mystery observer. He's connected to Reddick's network." Ethan slowly opened the file. Inside were images, emails, and a background report. The paper trail linked Reddick to a series of shell companies, one of which received anonymous funding at the same time Marla disappeared. Several transactions stood out. Unexplained cash movements, payments routed through offshore accounts, all initiated weeks before Lily was born. "Reddick worked for me while all of this was happening." Ethan said quietly, "Why would he?" Reed cut in. "He was watching you, Ethan, not just your wife." "You!" Ethan turned to face him. "What did he want?" "We think it was leverage, possibly for extortion, possibly because someone paid him to, or maybe he believed Marla was a liability to your career. But everything suggests he knew she was pregnant, and that he made sure you never found out." Ethan's hands clenched into fists. "And now, he's still operating, still silent, but he's active. If he knows you discovered Lily's identity, he could be watching again, listening." Ethan stood up. "Then it ends now." That night, he didn't sleep. He watched over Lily, who had fallen asleep in her room beside Button, unaware of the war swirling around her name. Ethan paced his office, reviewing every contract, every email, every moment when Reddick might have manipulated something, altered a schedule, intercepted communication. Reed erected a letter meant for him. It was all possible. The next morning, Ethan visited Charles and laid everything on the table. "I want legal action," he said. "Full disclosure. I want to know what rights I have to pursue this privately." Charles raised an eyebrow. "You want to expose a former executive of your own company? This will go public." "I don't care. You're risking more than your reputation." "I'm protecting my daughter." Charles nodded slowly. "Then we'll start with a formal subpoena." But Ethan wasn't willing to wait on lawyers and bureaucracy. That afternoon, he took Lily to a small private clinic under a different name. The staff had already been cleared, and the files scrubbed from public systems. He requested a second DNA test, one that would be independent of the previous sample and kept offline. Lily looked at him as a nurse collected her swab again. "Are we doing the same thing as before?" "Yes," he said, "but this time we keep it just between us." She nodded, trusting. As they left the clinic, Ethan received a message on a secure line, Reed's encrypted number. He opened the file. It contained audio, a recording. He listened. 2 voices. One was Reddick's. The other was unfamiliar. Reddick, you said the girl wasn't a threat. Unknown, she wasn't. Not until he found her. Reddick, we could have buried this. Unknown, it's not about burying. It's about keeping the pieces separate. You should have done your job. Then silence. Ethan played the clip again. And again, it was evidence of intent, of conspiracy. But it also meant something else. He had underestimated the scale. Reddick wasn't acting alone. Later that night, Ethan sat down with Reed. We go to him, Ethan said, face to face. Reed raised an eyebrow. You sure? If he's bold enough to surveil my family, I won't let this play out from behind glass. Set the meeting. The next morning, in a corner of a luxury hotel lobby in Midtown, Ethan sat across from Thomas Reddick for the first time in nearly 5 years. The man hadn't changed much. Same perfect posture, same cold eyes, the same unnerving calm. You're looking well, Ethan, Reddick said. Don't waste my time. Still direct, I see. Ethan slid the photo across the table. You recognize this girl? Reddick didn't even blink. Should I? She's my daughter. Reddick leaned back. Congratulations. Ethan's voice dropped. You lied to me. You intercepted communications. You used your access to make sure I never saw Marla's final letters. Never heard her calls. That's quite the accusation. I have evidence. And witnesses. Reddick smirked faintly. You're used to control. But there's more than one layer to the game. Ethan didn't move. I want to know who you were working with. I want their names. Reddick's smile vanished. You don't want to do this, Ethan. Walk away. You have her. That's what matters, right? No. What matters is making sure this never happens again. To anyone. Reddick stood. Be careful. Some truths cost more than silence. He walked out, leaving Ethan with more questions and answers. That evening, Charles called again. The subpoena had been approved, and the second DNA test, it returned identical results. Lily was unquestionably his. Now, it was no longer about proving the truth. It was about using it. Ethan returned home late. Lily was asleep on the couch, her hand gripping Button's fur. On the table was one of her drawings. A new one. This time, the stick figures were in a house, with windows and light, and no one standing in the shadows. Ethan picked it up, holding it like a final piece of something long unfinished. The decisive test wasn't in the results. It was in what he'd do next. The first envelope arrived without a return address. It was thin, anonymous, slipped discreetly into the morning mail delivered to the penthouse, wedged between document from Charles and an advertisement for an art gallery Ethan didn't remember subscribing to. At first, he thought nothing of it. Another leak, another empty threat. But as he tore open the top and pulled out the contents, his eyes narrowed. Inside was a single sheet of thick cream-colored paper. Typed, no signature, no letterhead. You think the truth sets you free. You've only scratched the surface. You miss someone. The note was accompanied by a photograph. Ethan recognized the setting immediately. It was the park bench where he and Lily sat weeks earlier. But this photo wasn't from a distance like the others. This one had been taken from behind, from just a few feet away. It captured a precise moment. Lily laughing as she leaned into him, her hand on his arm. It was intimate. It was invasive. And it had been taken by someone close. He stared at the note again. You missed someone. He picked up his phone and dialed Reed. We have a breach. Reed arrived within the hour. After analyzing the envelope and comparing the ink and paper stock to previous threats, he confirmed what Ethan already suspected. This wasn't delivered by standard mail. Reed said, someone physically brought it into the building. Maybe a courier, maybe a disguised visitor. Ethan's voice was low. That means someone walked right past security. And it gets worse, Reed replied. I ran background checks again on everyone who's had physical access to your space in the last month. There's one outlier. Ethan looked up. The temp caretaker from the community center. The woman you hired to stay with Lily during your meetings. Maria Cates. I checked her references myself. Reed shook his head. The ID she used was real, but stolen. The actual Maria Cates is in hospice care in Pennsylvania. Ethan stood, tension mounting in his shoulders. So who's been watching Lily from inside? I don't know yet, Reed admitted, but I'm tracing her last known address now. She vanished 3 days ago. Ethan's jaw locked. We're ending this. He moved to Lily's room. She was seated on the floor, drawing button again, this time with wings. When she saw his expression, she paused. Is something wrong? No, he said softly. I just want to make sure you're okay. She nodded, unconcerned. I'm with you. But Ethan didn't sleep that night. Instead, he watched the footage. Every frame Reed recovered from security logs. He slowed it, zoomed it, studied every face. Until at 2:36 in the morning from 3 days prior, he saw her, the fake Maria. She wasn't holding anything unusual, but the way she moved, the way she lingered by Lily's bedroom door, was wrong. And when she turned her face briefly toward the camera, Ethan recognized her. His stomach dropped. It wasn't Maria. It was Ava Miles. Ava had once worked for Marla, back when she volunteered for a children's outreach program. She'd been a junior coordinator, quiet, loyal, seemingly harmless. Ethan remembered her vaguely. Short brown hair, wide eyes, always in the background. She had attended their wedding, smiled in photos. Marla had trusted her. He had forgotten about her entirely. Reed confirmed it within the hour. Fingerprint records, volunteer rosters, an archived staff photo from the Outreach Foundation. Ava Miles had disappeared from public records 5 years ago. No job history, no credit, no leases. Ethan's mind raced. Ava hadn't been on anyone's radar. Not his, not Charles's, not even Reed's, until now. The next morning, another envelope arrived. This one wasn't anonymous. It bore a single name handwritten on the front, Lily Sanders. Ethan opened it first, intercepting it before Lily could see. Inside was a child's bracelet, identical to the one Marla had made, but this one spelled a different name. It read, Grace. Under it, another note, she was never supposed to be yours. Ethan handed the contents to Reed, without a word, but inside he was unraveling. Was Ava implying Lily had been intended for someone else? Or was the bracelet a message about another child? He returned to the box Marla had hidden all those years. Sifting through the papers, he found a single photo he hadn't looked at closely before. It was Marla, holding Lily, standing beside another woman, Ava. They were outside a clinic. And in Ava's arms, a baby, not Lily. Another baby, different eyes, different features. The label on the back of the photo read, July 3rd. Lily had been born in early June. This wasn't a baby picture of Lily. This was someone else. Ethan called Charles immediately. I need birth records for any child registered to Ava Miles between June and August of the year Lily was born. Quietly, hours later, Charles returned the results. There's no Ava Miles on file, he said, but there's a Grace Miles, born July 3rd. No father listed, mother deceased. Child entered foster care at 6 months. No adoption record since. Ethan closed his eyes. Marla hadn't just been running with Lily. She'd been hiding someone else's child, too. And Ava wanted her back. That night, Lily found Ethan on the balcony. You're sad again, she said. He crouched beside her. No, just thinking. She handed him her drawing. It was a picture of 2 girls now. One with a yellow ribbon in her hair. The other with a crown made of stars. Who's this? He asked. She smiled. That's Grace. I used to dream about her. He froze. Did your mom ever mention her? No, but I think I knew her anyway. He looked at her carefully. If Grace were real, would you want to find her? Lily nodded. Yes, because I think she's alone. And for the first time, Ethan realized this wasn't just a search for truth anymore. It was a rescue mission. The first sign that something was wrong came just before dawn. Ethan had been pacing the study for hours, unable to sleep, sorting through records of children's shelters and foster care networks. The search for Grace had taken on a frantic urgency. Every second felt like it might be one too late. Then the call came. It was a community center. "Mr. Miller," the woman said, her voice trembling. Lily's name just appeared in a hospital intake system. Ethan was already moving. "What happened?" "She was found unconscious outside the shelter you use to visit. Alone. No one knows how she got there." He didn't wait for more. Within minutes, he was in the car. Reed followed behind in silence. Neither of them spoke. The silence was heavier than fear. It was guilt. It was fury. It was helplessness. When Ethan arrived at the hospital, they directed him to the pediatric ICU. Lily was in a glass-walled room, pale, tubes running from her arms, an oxygen mask strapped to her face. A doctor met him outside the room, flipping through a chart. "She's stable for now," the doctor said. "But her immune system was already weakened, and she's developed a serious case of pneumonia, likely exposure-related. She's lucky someone found her when they did." "Who brought her in?" "No name given. She was dropped off by someone who left before registration. No surveillance footage. No identification." Ethan clenched his fists. "I need to see her." "Only for a moment. She's sedated." He entered the room slowly. The beep of monitors was the only sound. Lily's chest rose and fell under the machine's rhythm. Her fingers were curled slightly on the sheets, her hair damp with sweat. Button sat just outside the room, ears perked, tail still. Ethan knelt beside the bed and whispered, "I'm here. I'm not leaving." She didn't stir. Later, when Charles arrived, Ethan gave him a single instruction: find Ava. It took 2 days. During that time, Ethan never left the hospital. He slept in the hallway chair. He met with every specialist. He signed every form. He read to Lily even when she didn't wake. He held her hand even when it trembled, and at night, when the world narrowed to the hum of machines, he listened to the recording Marla had left, playing it softly on repeat. Then, on the 3rd day, Reed returned with results. "We tracked a payment trail," he said. "Anonymous deposits made to a halfway house in the Bronx. Ava was there. Briefly. She checked out 2 nights ago. Before or after Lily was found?" 2 hours before. Ethan stood. "She did this. She took her. Maybe, or maybe she was trying to deliver a message. There's something else." He handed Ethan a photograph, an image from a public clinic's waiting room camera. It showed Ava, older now, her hair cropped close, holding the hand of a child. A girl, small, dark-eyed, wearing a plastic bracelet. Grace. Ethan studied the timestamp. It was from last week. "She has her," he whispered. "She has Grace." That night, Lily finally woke. Ethan was beside her in an instant. Her voice was rasped, barely audible. "You stayed." "I said I would." She turned her head slightly. "Is Grace okay?" He swallowed hard. "I think we know where she is." "I saw her," Lily murmured, "before everything went dark. She said she missed me." Ethan couldn't hold back the tears. "Then we'll find her and bring her home." The following morning, Ethan and Reed drove to the last confirmed location, an abandoned building near Hunts Point. It was snowing again, heavy this time, blanketing the streets in a grim stillness. They entered through a side door. Inside, it was dark, damp, and littered with remnants of fast departure. Clothes, empty food wrappers, a child's blanket on the floor, a drawing, 2 girls standing side by side, one holding a balloon. Then a sound, a whisper, "Grace." Reed raised his hand, signaling Ethan to wait. From behind a makeshift curtain, a small face emerged, eyes wide, afraid, but not running. She stared at Ethan with the kind of stillness that came only from knowing loss. "I'm not here to hurt you," Ethan said. "I'm Lily's father." The name made her blink. "Lily? She's okay, but she needs you, and I think you need her too." From the shadows behind the girl, another figure stepped forward. "Ava." She looked gaunt, worn, her skin pale, but her eyes burned with fire. "You found us," she said. Ethan's voice was steel. "You left Lily in the cold. You nearly killed her. I saved her life before that. Ava shot back. The system failed her, just like it failed Grace. I did what I could. You ran. You lied. I hid, she said, her voice cracking. Because someone had to. She looked down at Grace. Say goodbye. Grace didn't move. I'm not leaving her again, Ava whispered, even if it means disappearing for good. Ethan stepped forward. Then let's stop running. Ava studied him. Then, slowly, she nodded. That night, Grace was admitted to the hospital. Malnourished, dehydrated, but alive. She was placed in a bed next to Lily's. When Lily saw her, even weak as she was, she smiled. Grace climbed in beside her without a word, and they lay there together, holding hands. Ethan watched from the door. 2 girls. 2 lives stolen and returned. Marla's choices, Ava's desperation, his own silence. They had all led to this moment. Not justice, but something close. A beginning. It was late November by the time Lily was discharged from the hospital, her lungs clear, her color restored, and her laugh returning in short bursts as the world around her shifted once again. This time for the better. Grace was discharged 3 days later, quieter, still adjusting, but stronger with each passing hour. They were inseparable from the moment they left side by side. Even the medical staff had begun referring to them as sisters, and neither corrected the assumption. Ethan had never expected to feel comfortable around the sound of children in his home. But now, the penthouse echoed with their voices, sometimes playful, sometimes bickering, sometimes so silent it carried the weight of unspoken healing. Button took to Grace the way he had to Lily, following her room to room, keeping watch with the same tired, loyal eyes. Ava was not part of the household. After lengthy discussion with Ethan and Charles, she agreed to enter a monitored transitional housing program where she could receive psychiatric evaluation, legal representation, and counseling. Ethan didn't forgive her easily, but he didn't prosecute her either. Her actions had danced on the edge of criminal, but her intentions, however flawed, had stemmed from something deeper than malice. You hid the truth, Ethan had told her the day she was taken in. I also kept them alive, she had answered. And neither of them argued beyond that. Charles initiated proceedings to file for legal guardianship of Grace. The process was complicated by the years of missing records, but the evidence they now held, from the photographs to Ava's testimony to Grace's medical files, was enough to build a case. Ethan hired a separate advocate to represent Grace's voice, one trained to work with children in trauma. She didn't speak often, but when she did, she said only, "I want to stay with Lily." The court listened. It was Thanksgiving morning when the ruling came in. Ethan Miller was granted full legal guardianship of Grace Miles, with a provision for continued psychological care and biannual review. The court recognized her as a dependent sibling of Lily Sanders, and while not related by blood, they were to be placed together in permanent custody. When the news came through, Ethan didn't celebrate. He simply returned to the house, sat on the floor between the 2 girls, and said, "You're home." Lily hugged him. Grace sat quietly, holding his hand. The days that followed were filled with small, ordinary things. Decorations, school uniforms, furniture shopping. The girls picked out bunk beds for the shared room they now refused to separate from. Ethan painted the walls with them, badly but with a smile. Grace taped drawings to the door, one of Ethan holding their hands, and another of Button wearing a crown. It was during a late dinner, a week later, that Grace spoke again with weight in her voice. "Do I still get to call her my sister, even if we're not born the same?" Ethan didn't hesitate. "She's your sister because you love her. That's stronger than blood." Grace nodded. "Then you're my dad, too." He said nothing, but the look in his eyes told him everything. When Christmas approached, the city transformed. Lights draped across Fifth Avenue. Storefronts bloomed in color, and carolers sang on corners. The girls spent hours decorating the tree Ethan had reluctantly let them drag into the living room. They named every ornament. Button had his own stocking. Then came the interview request. A journalist from a national magazine had followed the initial tabloid story about the millionaire and the beggar girl. But now she wanted to do a full profile, not on the wealth, but on the reunion, the mystery, the miracle of what had unfolded. Ethan declined at first, but it was Lily who asked him to reconsider. She told our story before. Lily said, "But wrong. Maybe now we tell it right." So they did. The article ran in mid-January. The title read, "Can I Eat With You, Daddy? The Girl Who Changed Everything." Photos accompanied the story. Lily and Grace in matching scarves. Ethan in the background, smiling, softly, not for camera, but for them. The public response was overwhelming. Messages poured in. Donations to children's shelters spiked. People wrote letters. Some shared their own losses. Others asked how to help. But Ethan didn't care about the spotlight. He cared about breakfast, about the way Grace had finally laughed without flinching, about the moment Lily ran to the penthouse yelling, "I got an A!" He cared about quiet Sunday mornings when they sat at the window with hot cocoa watching the snow fall. It was on one such morning, nearly a year after it all began, that Lily said the words again. She sat across from him at the table, Button at her feet, Grace beside her. "Can I eat with you, Daddy?" Ethan looked at her, smiled, and leaned forward. "You don't ever have to ask again." And they ate, not as strangers bound by fate or survivors clinging to what was lost, but as a family, built not from perfection, but from everything it took to survive. Together,